Welcome, beautiful souls, to Witnesses to Happiness. I am so glad you've carved out this little pocket of time for yourself today. In this explainer, we're embarking on a really deep meditative journey into the major arcana of the tarot. We're going to completely reframe how you see these beautiful images. We aren't here to do parlor tricks or simple fortune telling. Instead, as we walk this path together, we're going to discover that the tarot is actually a profound, highly structured psychological map of the human soul. It's like a mirror, reflecting exactly where we are on our personal growth journey. So go ahead and take a deep breath, settle in, and let's explore this together. The cards speak. Are you listening? I really want you to hold on to that question as we move through our time together today. Slow down, just quiet the noise of the outside world for a bit, and allow yourself to discover the true, hidden map of your very own inner landscape.
To begin understanding this map, we first need to look at the word arcanum itself. It actually comes from the Latin word for secret. But don't worry, this isn't a secret being kept from you. Rather, it refers to the hidden, archetypical principles of life that flow just beneath the surface of our everyday control. A standard tarot deck has 78 cards in total. Now, 56 of those make up the minor arcana, which deal with the more mundane, everyday events of our lives. But the 22 cards of the major arcana, which are numbered 0 to 21, while they are entirely different, they represent the grand, universal turning points in our lives. We're talking about the deep currents of fate, purpose, and spiritual evolution.
Now, it might actually surprise you to learn where these cards came from. They didn't just magically appear out of thin air in a mystic's tent. Back in 15th century northern Italy, tarot started out simply as a luxurious, hand-painted card game for the aristocracy. It basically reflected the moral and societal figures of the Renaissance, like the emperor or the pope. It wasn't until the 18th century, with the Tarot de Marseille, that esoteric and mystical interpretations were layered onto the images. And then finally, in 1910, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck was published. Created by Arthur Edward Waite and the brilliant artist Pamela Colman Smith, this deck totally revolutionized tarot. It turned it into the standardized psychological and symbolic tool that we use today. Understanding this beautiful natural evolution really helps us trust the tool even more.
And that brings us to a really beautiful concept known as the Fool's Journey. The 22 cards of the major arcana aren't just a random assortment of pretty pictures. They actually follow a highly logical, spiraling path of human development and psychological maturation. Essentially, we are all the fool, traveling through the different stages of life, facing new lessons and growing at each step. Let's take a look at exactly how this incredible journey is structured.
Notice how perfectly organized this path is. The cards from 1 to 21 are divided into 3 rows of 7, which are known as the 3 Septenaries. In the first level, cards 1 through 7, we're dealing with consciousness. This is where we develop our ego, build our careers, and just figure out how to take action in the physical world. Once we establish who we are out there, we move to level 2, the subconsciousness. Cards 8 through 14 guide our inner search. This is the stage where we retreat, question our ego, and really seek true psychological balance. And finally, level 3, superconsciousness, found in cards 15 to 21. This is where we do the heavy lifting, the deep work of shadow integration. It's the ultimate quest for spiritual wholeness and universal connection. It's just a beautiful spiral inward.
Before we look closely at a few specific cards, I want to offer you a gentle reassurance. Always remember this. No card is inherently good or bad. I can't stress that enough. Every single archetype reflects a spectrum of the human experience. This is absolutely crucial to understand. The cards simply reflect a duality of life. They're here to empower you, never to frighten you. Every archetype has a light side and a shadow side, and honestly, understanding both is where the true healing begins. So let's meet our protagonist. This is the Fool, card 0. The Fool actually stands outside the numbered sequence because he represents the pure divine child, just absolutely unlimited potential before anything is actually manifested. He stands right at the precipice of the unknown with completely open heart. Notice how he carries only a tiny bindle? That shows he's carrying absolutely zero heavy baggage from past experiences. And that little white dog jumping at his feet? That represents our pure animal instinct, gently warning us and guiding us as we prepare to take a leap of faith.
But remember that spectrum we talked about? The Fool holds a beautiful duality. In the light, the Fool invites us to approach our relationships or maybe a brand new career with unbiased trust, spontaneity, and what Zen Buddhism calls beginner's mind. It's that beautiful, innocent belief that the universe will catch you. But in the shadow, well, this exact same energy becomes naivete and irresponsibility. It turns into a bit of a Peter Pan syndrome, refusing to grow up, acting recklessly, and just creating chaos without any real direction. So the cards gently ask us,
When we take that leap of faith, are we acting from pure trust, or are we simply being careless?
Now let's gently look at one of the most misunderstood archetypes in the entire deck, card 13, Death. I want to completely dismantle any fear you might have around this card. Honestly, you can just forget every spooky Hollywood movie you've ever seen. In the psychological map of the tarot, this card almost never means literal physical death. Instead, it features a skeletal figure serving as the great equalizer and transformer. This archetype is really about the necessary, albeit sometimes painful, clearing away of old, outgrown structures in our lives, making room for fresh, vibrant growth.
When death shows up in our everyday lives, maybe in a career that's completely stagnated, or a relationship that has just run its course, its light aspect is profound liberation. It is a deep, sweeping new beginning that comes from finally understanding impermanence. However, if we fight this natural cycle, we fall into the shadow side of the experience. We start feeling a paralyzing fear of change. We cling desperately to the past, and that can lead to stagnation, depression, and this heavy feeling of being trapped in a life that just doesn't fit us anymore. Surrendering to this transformation, though, that creates the space your soul so desperately needs.
Sometimes, though, if we refuse that natural transformation of death, the universe steps in a little more forcefully. And this brings us to card 16, the Tower. Here you see lightning striking a stone tower, violently breaking off its crown. This represents divine intervention. It totally acknowledges how deeply unsettling it feels when our rigid ego constructs, our false senses of security, are suddenly struck by the lightning bolt of reality. Basically, the tower falls because it was built on a flawed foundation to begin with.
Grounding this in our modern, day-to-day struggles, the tower often looks like sudden burnout, a shocking truth being revealed, or a really abrupt change in our life plans. The shadow side of this experience is senseless chaos, unprocessed trauma, and a paralyzing fear of losing control. It literally feels like your world is ending. But the profound truth here is that the destruction of the tower is actually an incredible liberation. It's a flash of sudden enlightenment. It breaks you out of a prison that had become far too tight for your spirit, forcefully clearing the air of any lingering lies.
So, you might be wondering, how in the world does a randomly shuffled piece of cardboard connect so deeply with my personal struggles? Well, this is where we turn to psychology, specifically to the legendary psychoanalyst Carl Jung and his concept of synchronicity. Synchronicity refers to a meaningful coincidence. When you're going through a crisis and you happen to draw the tower, it isn't magic. It's a moment where the outer image perfectly resonates with your inner psychic state. The card is acting as a mirror, catching the reflection of your unconscious truths and pulling them right up into the healing light of awareness.
Because the cards act as these brilliant mirrors, they become an absolutely incredible tool for what psychologists call narrative therapy. So often we get stuck telling ourselves a story where we're the victim of our circumstances. But when we lay the cards out on the table, they help us externalize our problems. We can literally look at our heartache or our career blocks from a distance. The tarot allows us to actively retell our life story, reframing that heavy feeling of helplessness into an empowering search for personal agency and strength.
However, as your mentor in this space, I do have to gently but firmly warn you of a really common pitfall on this spiritual path. It's a concept coined by psychologist John Wellwood called spiritual bypassing. This is the dangerous tendency to use spiritual practices like, say, pulling tarot cards to avoid doing the real, messy work of resolving our emotional wounds. For example, ignoring genuine anger over someone crossing your boundaries just because you feel you must remain spiritually positive, or maybe consulting the cards endlessly to avoid making a really difficult, real-world decision. We have to remember, the cards are meant to guide your action, not replace it. To truly use this map of the soul safely, we have to be aware of a few specific psychological traps. First up is oracle addiction, which is where an individual loses the ability to make their own choices without consulting the deck first. Second is the nocebo effect. This is where charlatans weaponize so-called dark cards like death or the devil to instill fear and dependency, rather than actually fostering growth. And finally, toxic positivity, where we use light and happy interpretations to basically ignore the genuine heavy issues that desperately need our attention.
This is exactly why any true spiritual practice absolutely must be rooted in a strict ethical code. If you're reading for yourself or for others, please remember these pillars. Our goal is always true empowerment, never determinism. We must always acknowledge free will. The cards might show current energies, but the future is never, ever set in stone. We also firmly refrain from offering medical, psychological, or legal diagnoses. And of course, we honor strict confidentiality. The Tarot is a sacred space for the soul to breathe and find its own way forward.
Well, we've walked through history, psychology, light, and shadow today. We've seen how the Major Arcana is a beautiful, deeply reflective map for our own personal growth. The true magic, it turns out, doesn't live in the ink on the paper. It lives in your willingness to face your own shadow and step fully into your light. So, as we bring this explainer to a close, I want to leave you with an invitation. The next time you face a crossroads in your life, will you look outside for the answers, or will you dare to look within? The cards speak. Are you listening?